Grab a seat, hold my beer, and brace yourself for the top 5 weirdest and worst jobs that existed in human history. Number 1. Groom of the Stool. In Tudor times, in the royal households of England during the late 14th to the mid-17th century, a notable yet potentially unpleasant job was that of the groom of the stool. The groom's primary duty was to attend to the personal needs of the monarch. This role involved undressing the king, waiting for him during his visits to the toilet, and wiping the king's backside using cotton and a bowl of water, followed by drying with a towel. Additionally, the groom had the job of keeping track of what the king ate and when he ate it, organizing the day around the times the king needed to use the toilet. The groom also had to make sure the king stayed healthy by checking his poop to ensure everything was okay. Originally a role for those of lower status, it evolved into a prestigious position, typically given to a trusted court companion with direct access to the king. Despite its distasteful nature, the job was well paid, powerful, and involved overseeing royal finances. Number 2. Leech Collector. In the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe, there was a medical practice called bloodletting that gained popularity. This practice involved deliberately draining blood from a person's body in the belief that it would improve their health by removing perceived toxins or imbalances, often referred to as bad bodily fluids. As part of this bloodletting process, leeches played a significant role. Doctors believed that applying leeches to a patient's skin would facilitate the removal of these so-called bad bodily fluids. The leeches were allowed to latch onto the patient's body, and as they fed on the blood, it was thought that they were helping to cleanse the person's system. To meet the demand for these blood-sucking creatures, the task of collecting leeches fell upon poor peasant women. These collectors would wade into swampy waters, exposing their legs to attract leeches. After the leeches attached themselves, they would be collected in large numbers. Despite the seemingly straightforward nature of this process, it was not without risks. The act of bloodletting itself was based on outdated medical beliefs, and the leech collectors faced potential dangers, as leeches could drain a significant amount of blood and potentially transmit infections. In contemporary medicine, leeches are no longer used for bloodletting in the traditional sense. Instead, they are employed in certain surgeries to assist with blood circulation and promote healing. The leeches used today are cultivated in laboratories, eliminating the need for individuals to engage in the hazardous task of collecting them from natural environments. Number 3. Gong Farmer. Most farmers grow crops or livestock, but in medieval Europe, there was a unique job called a Gong Farmer. Instead of dealing with fresh produce, Gong farmers had the challenging task of handling something less pleasant: human waste. The term Gong in Gong Farmer likely originated from the Old English word gang, meaning to go. In those times, cities were expanding, but there were no proper sewage systems. People would simply throw their waste onto the streets or into holes behind their homes, making cities stink and causing serious health problems. Enter the Gong Farmer, who came up with a solution to the growing poop crisis. Their job was to collect all the waste generated by city residents. This meant digging up human waste out of pits and gathering it from privies. The collected waste was then recycled as fertilizer or used in construction materials. Despite the crucial role they played, Gong farmers were looked down upon by society. They often had to live separately from the rest of the population due to the stigma attached to their work. These unsung heroes faced health risks and were ostracized for doing a dirty but necessary job in medieval Europe, helping to keep cities cleaner and preventing the spread of diseases. Number 4. Jibit Worker. Imagine you're in a medieval town in Europe a very long time ago. If someone did something really wrong, like committing a serious crime, they might face a punishment called execution. This means they would be killed as a consequence for what they did. Now, here's where the Jibit Worker comes in. The Jibit Worker's primary responsibility was to set up the gibbet, which was a frame made of metal or wood. This frame was designed to hold and display the body of a person who had been executed for committing a crime. The gibbet was often placed in a prominent and public location, like a marketplace or near a town centre. After an individual was executed, the Jibit Worker had the unpleasant task of arranging the body within the gibbet. Once the body was placed in the gibbet, the worker had to ensure that it remained there for a period of time, as dictated by the authorities. This could mean dealing with the practical challenges of weather, decay, and potential attempts to tamper with or remove the body. The Jibit worker needed to maintain the effectiveness of the display as a public warning. The idea was to scare people away from doing bad things by showing them the harsh consequences. Number 5. Whipping boy. The concept of a whipping boy was prevalent in European royal households during the 16th and 17th centuries. A whipping boy was a young boy who was a companion to a prince or young royal, and their role was unique and rather unfortunate. In royal courts, it was often considered inappropriate or even unthinkable to physically discipline or prince directly. The main idea behind having a whipping boy was to provide a way to punish the royal child without directly inflicting physical harm on them. Therefore, a whipping boy was designated to bear the physical punishment in place of the royal child. The whipping boy was typically chosen to be close in age to the prince or royal child. They served as a companion, often sharing in the prince's lessons, playtime, and daily activities. When the prince misbehaved or failed in his studies, the whipping boy would be punished in his place. Whipping boys often received physical punishments such as flogging or whipping. The idea was that the whipping boy's suffering would indirectly teach the prince a lesson. Whipping boys were usually chosen from families of lower social status. This added an additional layer to the symbolism, emphasizing the distinction between the royal child and those who bore the physical consequences of their actions. Well, that wraps up our journey through the wild and wacky world of bizarre jobs in history. Until next time, stay weird and stay employed.